Hey
All right.
guys,
Good
good to see you
afternoon.
guys.
It's
Gentlemen,
been a
how are
while. Sorry for the hiatus, but the boys have definitely been up to some things. The last couple weekends were some events. We had a local event here in Michigan. Uh, Dylan took a trip out to northern Georgia. He can give you a little recap of that.
Oh yeah, that
how,
was a good
how was
time.
How
Anyone
was
who
it?
was, it was good. Anyone who was at 160th chick, I think we can all say it was it was something. There was a lot of numbers. It was good to see 3,000 people on the field. That's something that doesn't happen that much at most mainstream events anymore. So that was cool. But yeah, no, really big shout out to the Alton Jaeger Guards guys. Great falling in with that battalion. Good group of guys. We had like 53 people in our company alone, so it was cool to have a large independent company there. Got
yeah,
out in the morning, had a little morning battle at dawn, so that was cool. And then we ended up staying camped on the field for like the whole day till the next battle, and got to cook rations in the field. So that was a cool experience. And then that night, it got really hot. We had a few heat casualties that dropped out. Glad to hear that they're all doing okay now. That night, had our commissary turned into a local tavern, and everyone received passes to go get that, and we had a pay call to spend money at the tavern as well. So that was fun. And then yeah, Sunday I had one big battle, and then we just ended up me and friend Christopher Perez boy ended up taking off, and then we spent the next 3 days just touring Atlanta and Northwest Georgia, going to the different battlefields there, and just a really good time. It was, you know, good to see the boys again, get out in the field again. A lot of fun.
Dylan, what scenarios did they portray?
That would probably be my only real complaint against the event. Was there was in my opinion, there was nothing that really resembled any actual of the fighting that happened at Chickamauga, other than the fact that we were in Northwest Georgia. um, yeah, that was a little bit disappointing, but it was cool portraying the 27th Illinois, a unit I didn't really know anything about before that, and just learning all about Bradley's brigade and his trouble in the Vineyard Field against, you know, my Florida boys.
Okay.
But it was still a good time. Like I said, it's just good to see that many people on the field at once.
What were the numbers you think?
Right around 3,100, I believe, total.
Wow.
I think the Confederates outnumbered us, which is accurate for the battle, so that was cool. But there was, I'd say, so in our company we were a standalone company with like 53 guys, and then in the other battalions there was I think in the authentic federal battalion, they had close to 1,000 dudes probably, and then in the other battalion, they had another good several hundred at least.
Good, good.
Yeah, it's really
So they,
cool.
they did. I'm assuming they did Snodgrass Hill on the on Sunday, right?
Yeah, that was like their one thing that they did supposedly. I mean, the battlefield was just too small, really, in my opinion, to accurately portray any part of it. The hill that they did Snodgrass Hill on is not so much a hill. They kind of just pushed the Federals back up against the tree line, and then it was a surrender.
Okay.
But yeah, it was still a good time. Like I said, it's just good to get out there and be in a big fight nowadays, especially being back here and being in command at home. It's nice to get back into the ranks and get to shoot the rifle with the boys.
Yeah, good. Glad you had a good time.
Yeah, and sorry I missed your presentation. Like I said, if that wasn't there, I absolutely would have been in Gettysburg. And
Well,
now
you're
I'm
gonna get
glad.
it. You're gonna get it today.
That's
So
what I was gonna say. I'm super grateful we're doing this. I'm excited to hear your presentation on Perrin. This is gonna be awesome.
yeah.
So yeah, other Ben Cwayna was in Gettysburg while Dylan was in Chickamauga, and he was there for a Savas Beatty authors meetup. So I think it's public information now, correct?
Yeah.
That
Yep.
you're so Ben is under contract to have his book published by Savas Beatty, hopefully early next year sometime. But he was invited out by the company to give a presentation from his book on the regiment's performance at Gettysburg, which we are going to be so fortunate to hear. That's actually going to be the topic of this episode. So Ben's going to go ahead and take the lead. But we were talking this week, and Ben found some other interesting accounts of stuff. So real quick, before we get into your presentation, you uncovered some new pertinent 12 South Carolina information. Do you want to go ahead and let us know what you uncovered, huh?
So I'm always
unveiled.
looking.
Let's.
Yeah, I'm always looking, and I found always looking for descriptions of what the men were wearing and how they were wearing it and things like that, because there's just very little that I have found or uncovered from a South Carolina perspective. The regiment that we portray, normally the 12th Regiment, which is the unit that I've been writing about. So I was going through, and I read this years ago. Many of you probably read it. It's a Rebel War Clerk's Diary, which is John Beecham Jones, who was a clerk in the Confederate War Department, and he was privy to a lot of interesting highfalutin politicians. He rubbed elbows with all of the secretaries of war of the Confederacy, John Seddon, William Y. the Randolph, President Davis. And so he would be a person that was very in touch with the high command, and he was very privy also to their communications. Well, anyway, he wrote a very detailed diary that he left, and it's a 2-volume set, and I've had it for years, and I've never it's been a while since I've read through it. But anyway, I was reading in the chapters or the entries right before the Gettysburg campaign to see kind of what was the War Department talking about before Gettysburg, what were they doing, and I came across an entry from May 10th of 1863. And let me back up here. I'll set the context. One of the regiments from McGowan's brigade, the 12th South Carolina, which is the unit that I really am into researching and the one that the book is about, they were dispatched at Chancellorsville to guard prisoners right as the units were being fed into the flank attack on the second day of the battle, as Jackson's flank attack. They were at the very end of the column, and they were plucked. The 12th South Carolina was plucked from the line and put off to the side, and they had kind of acted as the Second Corps provost that whole evening and afternoon. And the next day or so, they marshaled 2,000 prisoners and marched them from the Fredericksburg area, or the Chancellorsville area, down to Richmond. So I find this account on May 10th, which is about, I said it in my research, I thought that they arrived in Richmond around May 9th or 10th. And on May 10th, there's an entry from Mr. Jones that says as follows, quote, "Detachments of federal troops are now marching into the city every few hours, guarded by, parentheses, mostly South Carolinians, dressed in homespun, dyed yellow with the bark of the butternut tree. Yesterday evening at 7 o'clock, a body of 2,000 arrived, being marched in by way of the Brook Pike near to my residence. Only 200 butternuts had them in charge, and a less number would have sufficed, for they were extremely weary. Some of them, however, attempted to be humorous." Then he goes on and gives some funny stories about the Federals being marched and some of the comments they made to the locals. But anyway, I just was taken aback. This is a definitive account of the 12th South Carolina marching those prisoners into Richmond on May 10th on the Brook Pike, which is, if you look at a map, the Brook Road now comes in right south, right from Fredericksburg down into Richmond. And he describes them as being dressed in homespun, dyed yellow with the bark of a butternut tree. And I remember our conversation a few episodes ago about butternuts and that term and how it was kind of derogatory. Yeah. So I called Ben. I was like, wow, you should, take a look at this. And so I just thought we could just talk about it real quick.
Yeah, that's so interesting that it's an actual description of the dye being a butternut dye. Now I'm wondering if it's yellow based on, like, who knows when they could have been issued these jackets, if it's gone yellow from fading, or if it's actually like that'd be really interesting if it was a yellow dye. I mean, I'd be surprised to find that.
So here's my working theory based on this and a number of other pieces of evidence. One is I'm pretty sure. So one of the surviving Richmond Depot jackets in the Milstead study that I reference a lot is very much tannish yellow color. It's a jean, but on some of the facings you can tell that it was dyed gray originally. So my guess, and then also, I don't know if you remember specifically, but we have the picture of those two brothers, Joseph and William Templeton, that was taken in the early months of 1863, we think. Those are very clearly Richmond pattern jackets. They have the epaulets, they have the buttons, they have the cut, the collar, everything about them just screams Richmond Clothing Bureau. So my best guess is that it was jean cloth, which is what they would have referred to as homespun, produced by some mill in Richmond, potentially Crenshaw or any number of the mills around that were sourcing fabric to the Richmond Clothing Bureau. So my guess is it was just because we have pictures of men from the 12th that we know are from the 12th and the Templetons in jean cloth Richmond Depot 2s. My guess is it's vegetable dyed Richmond Depot 2s, which coincidentally, I didn't plan this at all, didn't think about it at all, but that's exactly what I'm wearing here right now is my
that's kind of
jean
interesting.
RD2.
Do you think it shows like a level of disconnect from the Confederate government from what the actual soldiers were facing in the field? Like if a clerk in the War Department is because in the account it seems like he's almost a little bit surprised that they're clad in this lesser quality lesser quality made faded jackets, and it's enough of a surprise for him that he's actually going to mark it down like, oh, these butternuts. I almost feel like that's just a level of disconnect from like the War Department's understanding of how things are getting along in the field versus how they actually are.
I think there's that. I think also, and this is, I think one of the reasons that some of this stuff wasn't written about much is that the fabric color of the Confederate armies was really, really mundane to the people of the time period. When you think of levels of concerns for what's going on, what shade jacket my brother is wearing into battle doesn't pop up. I mean, even honestly, think about today. Other than making fun of the digital camouflage that we spent billions of dollars on, no one really thinks too hard about what the fatigue uniform of the Army is. It's like, oh, those are Army guys. They're wearing Army uniforms. And I think that was the same back in the day, and that we have this skewed idea because it's such an important part of what we do is studying material culture that I think we sometimes overestimate how much these guys were thinking about it. And even then, I think he's probably wrong about the butternut tree thing. I believe butternut tree plants give a reddish rust colored dye, not a yellow tan, but logwood faded in the sun for weeks of campaigning does give a yellowish tan color. Also, Dylan, do you remember the account that we did for 8th Florida? It was really, really similar. From a Yankee describing the fallen Florida Brigade soldiers, saying like they were as bright yellow as the wheat that they fell in or something like that. So
again, they match the color of the wheat.
Exactly. So,
and this John Beauchamp Jones was a very perceptive guy. I almost think it was somewhat of a nod to our Confederate boys in homespun, not real great quality jackets. Like they're heroes because they're wearing maybe, I don't want to say subpar uniforms, but homespun, not properly dyed, nice federal uniforms like the federal Yankees have. He probably looked at a contrast between the way the Federals were dressed and the way the Confederates were. It was probably a backhanded compliment to the South Carolinians. That's my opinion.
Like you guys look terrible, but we're proud of you.
If there's any account of what troops or which corps the troops that were captured by the South Carolinians came from.
They would have been all 11th Corps.
Yeah, okay, so that's what I figured. So yeah, so a lot of those guys hadn't even really seen battle before. Right. And they're in these brand new shiny blue uniforms, polished buttons, 2,000 of them, led by a ragtag group of homespun, 200 Confederates.
And he's wrong on that. The 12th was they were over 300 at that point. But,
okay.
Yeah, but you think a week of marching people down and other logistical needs of the regiment, probably 200 of the 12th. I mean,
Yeah.
also eyeball estimation of number
Right.
of men, I think we're fine. I think we're
Yeah. So
fine there.
it's one of those interesting accounts where you can, I know the 12th was the regiment that moved them.
Yeah.
And this guy is identifying them on May 10th. He says there's 2,000 Federals and they're going to Libby prison. And I mean, it all lines up, which was just really cool. And I thought it was just awesome.
Which volume is that in?
Volume 1. Yeah. It's right near the end of volume 1. Do you have it, Dylan?
I got both of those volumes. I got to check that out.
Yeah, it's page 318, May 10th.
I'm still, super deep into Grant's memoirs. It's going to take me a minute to finish. And then I don't know where I'm going to go from there. I got such a long list of books. I just got Hood's memoirs, which I'm really excited about. I'm hoping they're a little bit more exciting than Gordon's memoirs.
They're not.
Damn it.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing, and I'm going to take a little nod from the academic world here. When you're reading memoirs, when you're reading this stuff, make sure you give it its due weight, because memoirs were written to influence people and to show, your bravery. And it was about your memoir, right? John Gordon's memoirs were about John Gordon, and Hood's memoirs were to settle a score with Joe Johnston. And so you've got to read these things with a little bit of a discerning eye. They are good for some things, but they are pretty dry. And most of them were written, a lot of them, in the Confederate Army to settle a lot of scores, Hood's in particular.
That's why I was more bummed about Gordon's memoirs. I thought that, since most memoirs are written, 20 years after the war, Gordon wrote his like 3 or 4 years after the war. And I was thinking, like, for a guy that saw as much action as he did, being not as political as he is, that it would be more battle oriented about, look at Antietam. You think he'd be talking all about the Bloody Lane and what it was like to command troops there? No, it's just, we went to Maryland and then I woke up in a hospital 6 months later.
And I'll tell you why, because at the time he wrote those, you're looking at that golden era of reconciliation in the post-war years. And so it's not about the bloodiness. It's not about the carnage. It's not about the fact that the North and South hated each other. It's all about, if you read Gordon's memoirs, there's a huge reconciliationist theme in his memoirs. He wants the North and South to get back together. He's proud of the fact that they're working together, the two sections. And so there's a huge theme of reconciliationism as a strain there that is very evident. So he quite frankly, intently does not go into the battle details very much.
I just thought he would have talked about how he got shot in the face just a little bit.
Yeah, you think.
All right. Well, we've got a pretty big presentation coming up here from Ben. I've done the tour and everything, but I'm still just as excited as the first time to hear it. So real quick before we get into it, let's go through what you're wearing and what are you drinking. So I am wearing my Richmond Clothing Bureau jacket that is vaguely yellowish, Richmond Depot kepi with South Carolina buttons to mark the occasion. I don't know if you can. Yeah, there you go. South Carolina State Seal buttons. And drinking Edmund Fitzgerald Porter from Great Lakes Brewing. I'm about to grab another one right before Ben starts here. So,
yeah, I'm wearing my. This is just an early war commutation style frock that was actually put together by my friend Christopher Berezovoy. This is what I wore to the Liberty Rifles event, Distant Thunder, when we were portraying the 4th Texas. And then my good old smashed up Goober Grabber slouch hat with the trusted hat cord.
Confederate hat cord.
Yes,
yours is a Confederate hat cord too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And as we all know, this is very prevalent. And yeah.
Oh, and also I forgot, I'm keeping the theme with the yellow. I've got to wrap my beloved Wolverines are playing. They kick off basically right after we finish recording here. So go blue for those listening.
There you go. I just watched SC smash Colorado.
Good.
Yeah.
I all my stuff is put away for the year, but I do have my pipe, and
There you
I'm holding it, as my security. So,
go.
and I'm drinking some Jack and Coke.
Oh yeah, I
Excellent.
forgot. I'm also drinking a Yingling Premium, which I smuggled a whole case back from Georgia with because they don't sell it here in California.
Nor in Michigan. So, and listeners out there, if you would like to treat your podcast hosts, we all would appreciate a case of Yingling. If you
Yeah,
DM us
exactly.
on Facebook, send us a message. I'll provide addresses, and you can send us some supplies and goods, and we'll make sure to give you a fun shout out if some Yingling shows up at any one of our houses. So,
And
Yeah,
we
for
should
all of
say
you who live
too,
in free America.
what's up, Ben?
we should say too, if people have questions or want us to address anything on the show, obviously send us a note. And we'll definitely do it. So one of our listeners actually he recommended us doing the Chickamauga episode
Oh yeah,
um a few weeks ago. So that was great. And
And that was a lot of fun to put together too. Just having an idea come in, be like, hey, you guys should do this. Like, okay, cool. Hit the research, start putting it together, and then bam. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who checked that out as well. That was a lot of work went into that presentation, and that's our most popular episode so far. And I'm really glad to see people enjoying it. And please keep hitting that subscribe button. Please keep checking in on us. I know we were gone for a week or so, but we're gonna keep this going and just have a lot of fun doing this, and it's all for you guys. So
yeah.
appreciate it.
We do this both for our own enjoyment and for you guys. So if there's anything specific, just we're 100% open to feedback and communication. So. All right,
Also,
without further ado, I'd like to reintroduce Benjamin Cwayna, future author pending. Is that the
author, yeah, that's fair.
author pending of
I don't
the
think
Invincible
author is
12th,
good.
which is going to be released next year. So go ahead and take it away, Ben. Look
All right,
forward
thank
to
you,
it.
gentlemen. The title of the program is Never Have I Seen Such a Charge. This is the program that I gave last weekend in Gettysburg at the Gettysburg Heritage Center for about over 100 authors and Civil War buffs. It was really cool. I want to thank everybody for coming out for that, and
Good turnout.
would highly recommend it for anyone that wanted to go in subsequent years. Very good. A lot of battlefield tours. We did 5 battlefield tours in 2 days, and we had close to 5 or 6 different presentations inside at the Gettysburg Heritage Center. So
What all battlefields did you do again? Sorry to take away from
we did 2 at Antietam. We did the Burnside's Bridge, and we did one that a historian took us around and showed us where Robert E. Lee was during the battle.
Oh, very cool.
And then on the field at Gettysburg, we did Iverson's Brigade. We did Culp's Hill, and we did the 1st Minnesota against
Nice.
Wilcox. Yeah. So, which had some flashes of Florida Brigade in there as
I was
well.
about to say Perry's brigade was right next to him.
Yep.
So you went down, saw like the Dory Trossel thicket and all that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wasn't Perry was ordered to like guide on, like, you won't get orders, but guide on Wilcox, basically? Wasn't that kind of the
Yeah, it was just basically form on Wilcox's left and just go with him.
Conform his movements. Yeah. So we'll get going here. This is the order of battle for Perrin's Brigade, which is really Sam McGowan's brigade of South Carolina. This is one of the 2 South Carolina brigades that are at Gettysburg in the Army of Northern Virginia at the time. We have Abner Perrin, who is a colonel of the 14th South Carolina. He's going to command the brigade at Gettysburg for the wounded Samuel McGowan, who is on the right. Samuel McGowan had only recently taken over the brigade the previous winter after Maxcy Gregg had been mortally wounded at Fredericksburg. And so Samuel McGowan is actually going to get wounded pretty severely at Chancellorsville on the 3rd day. And his senior colonel of the 14th South Carolina, Abner Perrin, is going to take over the brigade and lead it north to Gettysburg during the invasion of Pennsylvania. So we have 5 regiments in the brigade. We have Orr's Rifles. We have the 1st South Carolina, the 12th, the 13th, and the 14th South Carolina. And as we all know, the Army Northern Virginia had been reorganized that spring into 3 corps. Lieutenant General A.P. Hill is going to command the 3rd Corps, and Major General Dorsey Pender is going to take over the 4 brigades of the new Light Division, which now has 4 brigades. Edward Thomas is Georgians, Alfred Scales is North Carolinians, the South Carolina Brigade under Perrin, and the North Carolinians under James Lane.
Isn't Pender just the coolest though?
Oh yeah, he was absolutely a great division, brigade and division commander, but the men had a huge fear of him. He was a hard disciplinarian. I can tell, whoops, I need to go back. Sorry.
One of my favorite things about Pender is that he, in his frock coat, had padding sewn in under the armpits so that he could huck his pack along with the boys. And now when you see your commanding general carrying a pack in the field with the boys, that's a soldier right there.
That's right.
A lot of respect for Pender.
The 3rd Corps is going to be the last corps to leave the environs of Fredericksburg in June of '63, as Lee begins the invasion north, and they're going to leave relatively late. When you think about Ewell's corps began the march around June 3rd. Here's a map from my book. It shows the relative marching of the corps and how they went up into Pennsylvania from June 16th to July 1st. I found this quote from Arthur James Lyon Fremantle, the British Observer, just talking about the soldiers of the division and how they were a remarkably fine body of men. They looked quite seasoned and ready for any work. Their clothing is serviceable, so also are their boots, but there is the usual utter absence of uniformity as to color and shape of their garments and hats, gray of all shades and brown clothing with felt hats predominant. They talk about that they're armed with mostly infields, and they have the red battle flags of the ANV versus the blue ones that you see in Bragg's army. That is a map of their march north. You see that they actually go right through Sharpsburg, Maryland. Some of the men actually are going to visit some of their dead comrades on the field at Sharpsburg where they buried them the year before. And they're going to pay honor to those comrades at Sharpsburg for the brief time that they're there resting on the side of the road. The best that I can tell, many of them went up the Smoketown Road and made a right on the Hagerstown Pike. As they neared Chambersburg, they're not going to go into Chambersburg per se. Now, some of Lee's troops did, but the brigade of Perrin's brigade is not going to go directly into Chambersburg. They're going to stay to the east of town and camp there in the latter part of June as they are making their way north. And let me just say this: the marching that they're doing is not hard marching. They're doing 12 to 15 miles a day. It's nothing that these guys can't handle. Are there stragglers? Yes. Are there guys that fall out? Yes, from the heat. But they catch back up to the column, and it's the men write that it was a pretty leisurely march per se, and was one that was actually somewhat enjoyable as they move into new territory.
That's such a contrast from the rest of the army.
Yeah.
Interesting.
This is a photograph. The middle photograph is Route 30. And if anyone that's been to Gettysburg that comes in from the west, you take that road into Gettysburg and you pass through the wooded area of Fayette and Greenwood, Pennsylvania, in the Michaux, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but the Michaux Forest. And but the Route 30 is a bypass. And so if you turn right on old Route 30, this is the turnoff, the middle photo that turns off onto old Route 30. And this is the original trace of the road that runs right through Cashtown, Pennsylvania. And this is a photograph of what that looks like. Thus, the photograph on the left is just a representative photo of the countryside there. It's pretty hilly, but it's the Cashtown Gap that people used to get through the mountains there, the South Mountain Range, to get over onto the other side of the mountains. This is a pretty good quote here from Private DJ Carter. "We have a large and effective force here, an army which has never been defeated. So you may know that success in whatever Lee undertakes is bound by all the glorious achievements which have heretofore crowned our arms to accompany us. He's going to write that on June 28th while he's encamped near Chambersburg. This is an interesting quote too. Private property was protected, but if we had known what was in store for our homes and families by Sherman and his vandals, we would have made a clean sweep and left them homeless. That's by Lieutenant J.R. Boyles of Company C of the 12th South Carolina.
Just a little bit of salt in that comment.
Dylan, here's that frock coat you were talking about. This is Dorsey Pender's frock.
I love that jacket so much. What a badass. I'm sorry. He's so cool.
There's that padding right under the shoulder.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. You can see right on under the armpits right there is the extra padding he put in so that when people complained about carrying a pack, you could be like, look, I got a pack on. What?
Yep. They're gonna arrive in Cashtown on the evening of June 30th, and they're gonna camp just to the west of Cashtown in a basin in the mountains. That's how it was described, and I think I've located that. They're gonna camp there that night. After breaking ranks that night and gathering wood for their fires, the brigade was issued a whiskey ration upon orders of General Hill. They were also ordered to prepare one day's rations, a sign that fighting could be in store. As they enjoyed their whiskey and their rations, a camp rumor spread throughout the regiment that the enemy was not far off. After their dinner, as the sun was setting, and a brief rest, several companies of the 12th Regiment were ordered to picket the area around Cashtown, most notably to the south. Company commanders quickly got their men in line and moved off while the remaining units rested in the gap. We have a photograph of A.P. Hill, as he may have looked in 1863, and then below him is Dorsey Pender, who's the division commander. So Pender's division is going to be camping just west of Cashtown, all the way back to almost where that turnoff is at Route 30.
Wow.
Now whiskey
Heath's
ration
division is going to be to the front of him, right in Cashtown, and moving actually from Cashtown out farther east towards Gettysburg. What was that, Ben?
Whiskey ration. They're not partying it up like Early's division. It's
No,
a
just
gill,
got a
which
gill.
is like basically a shot, right?
Yep. They each got a gill of whiskey.
Ounces.
Yep. And
Yeah,
Ben,
Early's division got hammered, didn't they?
yes, they did.
And then they never got another whiskey ration the rest of the war after that.
Most of them were dead.
What were you going to ask there, Ben?
Ben, you said that there was perhaps a uniform distribution that night too.
Yeah. So from records I've been able to find, most companies of the 12th have uniform documentation to June 30th, 1863, and smattering jackets, pants, a couple caps here and there. I think a few companies received one or two caps. They'd look like this. Now I'm not 100% sure. There's records of them being issued off the wagons, but also I do know that a lot of the paperwork was done quarterly, and June 30th ended second quarter. So sometimes I don't know if it was per se in the field or if it was a record of issuances during the second quarter, but I do believe that they were being issued uniforms on the campaign march. There was definitely supplies in the wagons for that type of thing. And I think 6 or 7 of the companies I've found uniform issues of for the 12th. There.
Yeah, so they're getting the wagons are right with them. They're going to be getting maybe some requisitions there right in the gap that night.
Yep. Also, one other thing, lots of shoes. They've been issued shoes up to and including this campaign. So at least the 12th was not marching into Gettysburg looking to replenish their shoes. They already had them.
Yeah. So the next morning is that ominous morning, and by all accounts, and they may have been writing with some hindsight there, but it was somewhat of an ominous morning. There was a little bit of sprinkling rain. It was a heavy air. The mist was there, and these guys were up at about 5 a.m. for reveille. The whole brigade's going to have about 2,000 men, including a kind of a provisional sharpshooter battalion under command of Captain William Haskell of the 1st South Carolina. And this sharpshooter battalion is going to be about 130 men, so to speak, give or take. And it's going to be marching along with the brigade. But it's important to understand that Perrin's brigade was the first brigade in the 4-division Pender's division. And so they're going to be at the very front of the division that day. To their front is all of Heath's division. So 2 full Confederate divisions are marching down this road, and the men of Perrin's brigade are at the very center of this column because they're at the very head of Pender's division and at the very rear of Heath's. So they're right in the middle of this column. This painting here is from Don Trione, or no, not John Trione, Dale Gallen, excuse me. And this is a great photograph of the snaking column coming down the gap past the Cashtown Inn at the time. So about 2,000 men. As I said, the brigade was first in line, and the order of march is going to be the 13th, the 12th, the 1st, and the 14th South Carolina. Orr's Rifles, which incidentally was probably the biggest regiment, is actually going to be left behind to guard the divisional wagon train. Reveille is going to be at 5 a.m. in the basin of those mountains. They're going to be marched at 8, but they're going to wait in line until about 8 a.m. and follow Heath. It's going to take Heath 3 hours to get all 4 of his brigades out of the Cashtown Gap, out of Cashtown, and marching into that flat country on the way into Gettysburg. I was going to say one other thing, that they were basically, the other companies that were on picket came back right around the break of dawn, got their traps, shoved some food in their mouths and got in the line, but they're going to wait about 3 hours to get marching that morning. They're not going to take off until about 8 o'clock. Around about an hour into the march, they're going to stop near McKnightstown and fill their canteens. And they're going to have a very slow, methodical march towards Gettysburg because they're following a whole division of Heath. And what's Heath doing? Well, he's deploying his brigades on the flat ground and the rolling hills, and they're advancing against Buford. And so there's stops, there's halts, there's double quicks up, there's waiting. It's as they get closer and closer to Gettysburg, the pace of this march slows, and it becomes much more of a slow trot and somewhat frustrating. But they can hear the popping and the crackle of musketry to their front as they approach the 7 miles to Gettysburg.
Didn't they also write about they were seeing all of the vices thrown off to the side of the road, like the cards and the whiskey bottles and the tobacco and all that?
Yep, they saw the stuff that the guys from Heath's division were throwing away as they knew they were going to enter into battle, so those things wouldn't be sent home to their parents or their loved ones. They're going to march down all the way to present-day Knoxland Road, which back then was called Whistler's Ridge. And they're going to turn right. They're going to go by Files right. They're going to turn the column to the right, at least Pender's division. And remember, the Perrin's brigade is the 1st brigade. So they're going to follow that road to the right, down all the way, almost to Old Mill Road, current Old Mill Road, which is a good mile almost down that ridge line. They're going to halt. They're going to front towards the east. This is the first shot marker house. On Whistler's Ridge, an original photograph, or at least a close to original photograph of that area. The area off to the left is where they're going to be filing off onto the ridge and heading to the south. And as you see on the map on the right, courtesy of Phil Lano's map on page 108, this isn't quite where they are on Whistler's Ridge, but this gives you a good idea of their formation. Scales's brigade is going to be hugging the Chambersburg Pike, and Perrin's brigade is going to be to their right and dressing on them. Lane's North Carolinians and Thomas's brigade are going to be to the left of the pike. So it's a very classic maneuver, using the road as the axis, and I must say, incidentally, following almost the same deployment of Heth that morning. Okay, both sides of the pike. This is just some interesting photographic evidence of what the area looked like during the battle and campaign in the 1880s and 90s. This is the Cashtown Pike. You get a good sense for the openness of the ground. In the photograph on the left, off to the right, is the Herbst Woods. Okay, So that gives you the perspective. We're looking east here, down the Chambersburg Cashtown Pike, and those woods off to the right are the Herbst Woods. I think we're looking at a very similar viewpoint in the 1870s on the photograph on the right.
And the railroad cut would be off to the left over on that side of the road.
Correct.
Yep.
So
you see that right map right there.
From Whistler's Ridge, they're going to make a forward march in battle line, full divisional advance from Whistler's Ridge to Hare's Ridge. Right around, I would say probably around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And they're going to basically be dressing on scales as North Carolinians. And they're going to basically go full divisional forward march in battle line across those open fields and gullies, the tree lines, the fences. This is going to be a very difficult march for these guys. And they're following in the wake of Heath's division, okay? They're basically following Heath at a respectful distance. They're the supporting line for Heath. This is classical Civil War tactics, and it's a good tactic, and it's going to carry the day. And so they're going to follow in the wake of Heath's division, and they're going to end up halting on Hare's Ridge, the next big ridge. They're going to halt there. At that point, Lane's brigade is going to be brought all the way from the other side, the north side of the Chambersburg Pike, and they're going to be placed on the right of Perrin. And you see this map shows this, okay? So we've got Scales dressing on the Chambersburg Pike. Then we've got Perrin's brigade in the middle. And now we have Lane on the right with Thomas's Georgians back to the rear on the other side of the pike in reserve. So they're going to halt on Hare's Ridge, and they're going to take in this panoramic view of Heath's fight with the Iron Brigade, all of the Biddle's Brigade, all of those fighting down in the valley there of Herbst Woods and the Willoughby Run Valley. And basically, they're going to see the engagements of Heath's division in the afternoon as Lee orders a general assault of all the lines when Rhodes shows up on the north. Again, they're going to be basically dressing on Scales's brigade whenever they move forward.
At what point do they replace Pettigrew's men?
So at 4 o'clock, they're going to get word that Pettigrew's guys have pretty much been fought out, okay? And Pender is going to ride all the way down the divisional line. He's going to say, hey, good boys, we're going forward pretty soon. And they're going to move forward just about 4 o'clock. Here's a quote from Captain William S. Dunlop of Company B of the 12th Regiment. His photograph is to the right. He said, the vast line advanced through an open field across the small stream and mounted the smooth hill behind. So basically, Aaron's brigade is going to be moving eastward, dressing on Scales's brigade with Lane to their right. They're going to come off Hare's Ridge. They're going to move down into the valley of Willoughby Run. They're going to cross the Willoughby Run stream, and they're going to start making that descent or that ascent up Seminary Ridge towards the seminary. And you can see the map here from my book. This is kind of the route that they took. They're going to run into the broken ranks of Pettigrew and Archer's brigades. You know, remember, Pettigrew's brigade is a very large brigade. Their men are overlapping some of Perrin's, and they're going to run into some of Archer's Alabamians and Tennesseans who are down there resting after they got their nose bloodied that morning. This is a view of that area, okay? To the right is basically Willoughby Run. I think this is, what, Reynolds Avenue? I'm not quite sure on the park, but basically to the left would be the seminary. And then this is that pie-shaped area of land between the Chambersburg Pike and the Hagerstown Road. And so they're going to come right up here. The full brigade is going to be marching in battle line, and they're going to start engaging the men, the men of Biddle's brigade and the remnants of the Iron Brigade who are out in the field fighting Pettigrew. Pettigrew's guys are going to go to ground. They're said, we're done. We're out. They go to ground, and the South Carolinians literally pass through the broken ranks. And one of the South Carolinians said, the poor boys could hardly raise a cheer for us. They were so worn out. And the order is going to be, don't fire your musket. Do not fire your musket. We're going to close with the enemy. We're going to charge them, and we're going to drive them from the field. Well, that didn't really happen because Biddle's brigade, Roy Stone's, and Solomon Meredith's troops, they're going to be holding a very strong line out there. It's a ragged line, but it's a strong one, and they're going to start opening up on these South Carolinians moving forward. And the South Carolinians are going to have to actually halt and return fire. They're going to start firing volleys, independent fire. And I must say this, that the brigade to their left, which is Scales's brigade, they're going to have to go through the broken ranks of Brockenbrough's Virginians, and they're getting absolutely blistered by federal artillery that are posted along the Chambersburg Pike. This is just, I put in this very interesting kind of a controversy, Gettysburg controversy. This is that photograph of the dead soldiers, the mystery photograph, the Harvest of Death. This is where Scott Hartwig thinks that the photograph was taken, and I actually agree with him. I think this is absolutely dead on point. I think these are men of probably the 20th New York that the 12th South Carolina and Pettigrew's guys were fighting. I'm sorry, the Perrin's brigade and Pettigrew's brigade were fighting that day. If you look at it, this looks like it was a battle line. This is and it's out in the middle of the field where they were fighting. And most importantly, these were guys that had not been buried after the battle because they were behind Confederate lines. So I believe that this is where the Harvest of Death was taken. And here's the other photograph from it from the other perspective. Those have been to Gettysburg prior to Lee's headquarters being restored. That area off to the right there where the Seminary Ridge pointer is the old area where Lee's headquarters is. And I think this is exactly where the Harvest of Death photograph was taken.
That looks pretty on point right there. Like you can even see the dip in the ridge right there leading up to the railroad cut in Chambersburg Pike. It's like exactly the same.
Yep. So some people believe it, some people don't.
At what point does so you mentioned that Scales is now passing through the broken ranks of Brockenborough, and they're getting hammered with federal artillery. Is that the point where Scales stops supporting
Yes.
Perrin's brigade?
You read my line. We're gonna get there here shortly, but yeah. So basically, as these brigades are moving forward, Pettigrew's men are going to go to ground. Perrin's 4 regiments move through them, and basically, this is classic Civil War tactics, right? Pettigrew had fixed the enemy. Pettigrew did all they could, and now Perrin's going to move through and kind of take the position, right? But what happens is, as with any advance, okay, gaps are going to be created, and that's going to impair the efficiency of your firepower. So the 12th and 13th South Carolina that are on the right of the brigade, they're going to somewhat veer to the right towards the Fairfield Road. The 14th and the 1st South Carolina on the left of the brigade, they're going to kind of be tethered more to Scales's brigade, and they're going to kind of drift leftward. And so there's going to be gaps that are created in the brigade. It's not going to be this tight formation that we thought it was going to be. But artillery fire is going to start raking the 1st and 14th South Carolina on the left because they're absolutely turning their fire now on those South Carolinians because Scales's men and Brockenbrough's men are basically gone to ground, okay? And on the right, the 12th and the 13th South Carolina are getting small arms fire from the 121st Pennsylvania, 142nd Pennsylvania, and 80th New York, and a bunch of Gamble's dismounted troopers that are on the other side of the Hagerstown Road. But like I said, after being ordered not to fire, Colonel John L. Miller of the 12th South Carolina, he's going to order a volley into the Federals, and this fighting is going to start breaking down into kind of this back and forth stand-up fight in this open field. Now, we're gonna get to Lane and Scales here in a moment. But basically, it's going to stagger the brigade. Okay, it's going to kind of halt there. And at one point, though, it looks like they're actually going to start falling back. And Colonel Perrin is going to see this kind of wavering of the brigade, and he's actually going to spur his horse through the gap between the 1st and the 12th South Carolina. He's going to draw his sword, and he's going to yell forward, and he's going to lead the 4 regiments ahead in a hasty charge. The South Carolinians cheering and rushing their battle flags forward under the severe fire. It was a turning point in the day. This action gave new life to the brigade. recalled Lieutenant J.R. Boyles of Company C, 12th South Carolina. And so they're going to charge, and those federal units that are out in the open field are going to fall back hastily to the grounds of the seminary, running roughly from the Chambersburg Pike on the north to the Hagerstown Road to the south. And so they're going to break and run. Okay. The problem
this is the Iron Brigade and Gamble's men and all of them to fall back and really change. You're right. It's a turning point in the day, that first day.
Yep. We've got the 12th South Carolina's battle flag on the left, Perrin's photo in the center, and a photo of the charge, or a painting of the charge on the right. And this is where things break down, though, because Perrin's guys are going to have absolutely no support on the right or the left. Okay, and so I've titled this slide, where is Lane's brigade? Lane's brigade are advancing theoretically on the right, and they're supposed to be keeping aligned on Perrin's left. They're nowhere to be found. They're lagging way far behind. They're very worried about the presence of Gamble's dismounted troopers. They're being very cautious. I've even seen some historians that say that Lane maybe had formed a square out there. I don't think that's accurate, but I've heard some people say that. And so Lane's brigade is going to be off to the right flank. They're going to just not come up at all. And what it's going to do is it's going to uncover the 13th and the 12th South Carolina, who are just going to start getting enfiladed by Gamble's troopers that are along the Hagerstown Road. Okay. And Governor Bonham, after the battle, Perrin is going to say bitterly, Lane's brigade never came up at all. Okay. So there's a picture of Jim Lane there on the left. And then on the right, on the left of the brigade, the 14th and 1st South Carolina, they're going to be taking all of the canister that was designated for Scales Brigade, because Scales Brigade, they've halted as well. And so you've got another North Carolina brigade on the left, which is not advancing on the left of the brigade. And so 14th and 1st South Carolina, they're just going to get blistered. The 14th South Carolina is going to take the most casualties of the brigade that day. And basically, they're going to be almost routed. Here's a great quote from Lieutenant Colonel John Brown of the 14th. To stop was destruction, to retreat was disaster, to go forward was orders. And so the Perrin South Carolina Brigade is basically moving forward without any assistance. Okay. There's 4 brigades in the light division. One of them is moving forward to attack the remnants of 3 federal brigades.
And they're just getting infiltrated on all sides.
Yep.
Like he said.
And their formations are starting to break apart too. Okay. So something has to happen. They can't stay out here in the open ground, and that's not their plan to begin with. They wanted to close with the enemy in charge. So what's going to happen is Perrin's going to give orders. He's going to basically divide the brigade in 2. He's going to give orders to the 14th and 1st South Carolina to maneuver to the to oblique to the right to avoid a plank fence. And then they're going to change fronts to the left, and they're going to basically flank the Federals out of the barricade at the seminary. Okay? While that's happening, the 12th and the 13th South Carolina are going to almost change fronts to their right, and they're going to push the Federals of Gamble's out of their stronghold along the stone wall at the Hagerstown Road. So the brigade is actually going to go like this. It's going to split, and they're each going to
facing such a gnarly fire from all sides. Perrin decides to just address both threats at once. Orders the 2 left brigades to oblique to the right, and then change fronts to the left, and then the opposite for the 12th and 13th South Carolina brigade regiments on the right of the brigade, and then just push out both federal forces on either side.
Yep, and they're going to do it.
A mall, basically. Just wedging in between and.
Yep, and here is the photograph or the map of what that looks like. You see here, you've got the 14th and the 1st are going to change fronts to the left. They're going to move in there just to the south of the seminary. They're going to strike right where the 151st Pennsylvania is, between the 151st and the 142nd. And 14th is going to basically make more of a frontal assault on the 24th and the 19th Indiana. And they're then going to sweep that north Okay. I've even read some accounts where some of the Federals went in the south door of the seminary and went out the north door as they were retreating. And the 12th and the 13th are going to do the same on the other side. The 12th is going to make a hard right wheel or turn, however you want to put it, change front to the right, and they're gonna squeeze in there between the 121st Pennsylvania and the and Gamble's men, and then the 13th is going to basically direct a direct charge, and they're going to sweep them out. They're going to just start sweeping them out, and that's what they did. And this thing happened in about 10 or 15 minutes, the whole fight.
Who do you think had a harder time with that? The left half of the brigade against Biddle's men, or the right half against Gamble's?
I would say, so if you look at Gamble's men, you know, they've got those carbines, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now they're not Spencer repeaters, but they've got the breech loading carbines, right? Honestly, probably the left end of the brigade probably had it harder because not only were they getting hammered by artillery, they're going up against infantry.
And not entrenched, but defended infantry. They're using fences, and
there was a barricade there that they had built earlier that day, so there was a defensive position there.
There's also
I would say the left.
2 batteries of artillery against the left brigade as well, whereas Gamble's dismounted troopers don't have any artillery.
Right. I would say the left. And they're gonna basically rout these guys very quickly. I mean, this thing doesn't take very long to finish.
And so they're pushing them north towards the railroad cut is where they're going to end up.
And they're going to basically use the Chambersburg Pike to retreat back to Gettysburg. Whereas Gamble's guys are going to cross the field, the open fields from across to Cemetery Hill.
Right.
Our line now swept down the hill in pursuit of the fleeing enemy and across the field into the city. That's from Captain William S. Dunlop, who's commanding the right flank company of the regiment that day, of the 12th Regiment. This is a photograph of the Chambersburg Pike going into Gettysburg. Dorsey Pender is, he doesn't know what happened. This thing's happened so quickly. Pender believes that Perrin's brigade actually got captured because he'd been on the other side
behind the enemy lines. They're just like
he'd been on the other side of the line trying to rally Scales's brigade because that was his old brigade.
Right.
He rides over to this flank, and he's going, "What happened to the South Carolinians?" And he wonders out loud if the brigade had been captured. And this lieutenant Simmons from the 12th said, "No, sir, they're just over the hill beyond yonder. They drove the Yankees out there." And with that, Pender kicked his horse in the side and went up there and found him. The 12th and 13th, they did not advance very far after they drove Gamble's men out. But the 1st and 14th, they're going to drive those fellows right into Gettysburg, down the Chambersburg Turnpike. The 14th is actually going to go to the left, directly along and between North Boundary Street and the old railroad embankment, until it reached the main street running south through town. So they're actually going to get to the Carlisle Road.
Oh, wow.
and the 1st is going to go right down the Chambersburg Road into the square.
Oh my. So is there an argument to be made that
yes, I know what you're going to
say. They were the first into the town?
They were. They said, read my last bullet point. Legend has South Carolinians were the first to raise their flag in Gettysburg, and I believe arrived well before that of their Second Corps comrades.
Coddington would have to argue with you.
Well, I'll take him on, you know. Here's another photograph of the seminary on the left, the Chambersburg Pike on the right. You've got the Sheeds house up there on the right and the seminary to the left. This would have been the road that the 1st South Carolina pursued the federal troops down.
And that's facing westward, correct?
Facing westward, yep. This is a great quote from Charles Wainwright of the 1st Corps Artillery. He goes, "Never have I seen such a charge. Not a man seemed to falter. Lee may well be proud of his infantry. I wish ours was equal to it." Now here's another one that I think is very telling. And I've got 2 sources on this one. Colonel John Miller is up near the Hagerstown Road. He's reorganizing his men. He's getting the units formed back up. Dorsey Pender is going to ride over to him while he's got his officers in a little bit of a gaggle talking about what they're going to do. And Pender's going to ride up to Miller and he goes, "Colonel, this brigade has done the fight for my division. In vain, I have endeavored to bring up the remainder of my command." So Pender's trying to get Lane up. Pender's trying to get Thomas up. Pender's trying to get Scales' men up. They can't. They're so disorganized or afraid they're not coming up.
Meanwhile, the brigade is like way in front of everybody.
Yeah, I mean they're out in front of everyone. And so here's some photographs of where they're going to spend the night. The center photograph is that stone wall that Gamble's men had been behind, and the brigade's left flank is going to be right here that evening, extending down to the McMillan farm, which is the photograph to the left. And so it's going to basically start at the Hagerstown Road. Those units are going to be extricated from Gettysburg. They're going to be brought back the 1st and 14th, and they're going to shift down to the right. So the brigade's actually going to go, their wings are going to flop. And so the 12th and the 13th are going to be on the left, and the 1st and 14th are going to be on the right now, the brigade. And the 14th is going to camp in the orchard of the McMillan farm. And so you're going to have the brigade camped all the way from the Hagerstown Road down to the McMillan house. Okay. And then the right photograph is a photograph looking out towards Cemetery Hill, Long Lane. We'll get into that later, but that's where that's going to be the viewpoint, the view shed from where the 12th South Carolina camped that night, looking out towards Cemetery Hill. Now that evening, I do have accounts of the brigade wagons coming up into the lines, right up to their camp, and resupplying them with ammunition. I don't know if they provided rations. I can only think that they did. Haskell's sharpshooter battalion is going to be deployed the next morning down to drive Federals out of Long Lane, which is a farm lane that emanates from Gettysburg to the southeast. And so the sharpshooters, along with a couple of companies from the 12th Regiment, are going to go down there and flush those Federals out of Long Lane back towards West Cemetery Hill. And they're going to be skirmishing for the rest of the day back and forth. Now, let me see here where we are. So Rhodes's division, a portion of Rhodes's division, Daniel's brigade, North Carolinians, they're going to come in and filter in on the left of the brigade at the seminary. And if you look at the maps of the second day, you're going to see some of Daniel's men up there at the seminary camped out. So on the evening of July 2nd, we've got what's going on, right? Longstreet's attack on the right and Ewell's attack on the left. Hill's in reserve, kind of waiting to see what happens and to take advantage of any breakthrough. Pender's division is waiting, and Rhodes is going to come out. He's going to draw his men out of Gettysburg to assist Early's attack on East Cemetery Hill. But as we know, that attack is going to be late. He gets his men out way too late. And Ramseur, who's his senior brigade commander, is going to decide not to attack West Cemetery Hill. They're going to fall back to Long Lane. And what's going to happen is Pender's going to be wounded, and Pender is going to turn over command to James Lane, who's going to move 2 brigades of the light division up to Long Lane with Rhodes, Perrin's brigade and Thomas's brigade.
So where exactly was Pender wounded? Not in Long Lane.
He was on the right of the line on Seminary Ridge.
Okay.
So he would have been probably down near the McMillan house or somewhere between the McMillan house and the Lee Monument.
And so he's still directing Perrin's brigade at that moment, though, to move, ordering.
Yeah, they're all waiting to go forward.
Okay.
And a shell's going to hit him, in the leg, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Perrin's brigade's going to spend the night in Long Lane, and here's a photograph of the reconstructed Long Lane now that runs back behind a neighborhood in Gettysburg, and they're going to spend the night in the lane because of that aborted attack on the evening of July 2nd. There's going to be very heavy skirmishing the next morning and all day up through Pickett's charge. Some people say it was the heaviest skirmishing they've ever witnessed. That's from Colonel Perrin's report. They're going to be basically duking it out with 11th Corps guys of Orland Smith's brigade Krzyzanowski, and Steinwehr's division. Entire regiments are going to be deployed from the brigade at various times between Long Lane and West Cemetery Hill. And we're basically looking at the area between Long Lane and Steinwehr Avenue. Okay. So on the right is obviously your historical map. On the left is your modern day viewpoint. This is where Long Lane is and was, and this is where they're going to be sitting for all of July 3rd. Okay. And that whole area from Long Lane up to Steinwehr Avenue and Taneytown Road is going to be a skirmish haven. Okay. Tons of skirmishers and skirmishing back and forth, entire regiments being deployed. This is a battle in and of itself, although it gets absolutely no credit in the historiography of Gettysburg.
And none of that area is protected battlefield ground. That's all private property.
Correct.
Wow, that's a shame.
Basically, it's where the McDonald's is, it's where the KFC is, it's where so it basically runs from the Dobbin House down to General Pickett's Buffet. That's the area that they were skirmishing in. Hospital
and then
area.
that neighborhood behind it was the crossfire zone, basically.
Yep.
So okay, so I'm sorry, could you point like on this modern map where Pickett's Buffet would be?
So Pickett's Buffet, you see Steinwehr Avenue.
Yeah.
Okay, the yellow.
Right.
See my cursor? Pickett's Buffet is about right there.
Okay. And then so just to the right of that was where we all parked for the 8th Florida event. I'm just wondering so that would have been, it's very close to Ziegler's Grove. It's basically in between Ziegler's Grove and then the start of Steinwehr Avenue right there.
Yep. And the Dobbin House,
right in the path of where the 14th and the 12th would have been skirmishing.
Yep. And the Dobbin House is right where my cursor is, right there. And
isn't it? Yeah.
That's where they're going. I mean, basically, it's this whole area right here is going to be full-time skirmishing.
So from that red line, the red line is the lane that all of Pender's men would have been in, as well as the brigades from Rhodes. Yep. And they're moving through the town right here. Well, what is now the town, towards the Federals that would be on Steinwehr Avenue.
Yep. And if you look at my map on the right, here's Perrin's brigade. You've got the 12th, the 14th, and actually this map is wrong. I've had to change it. It's the 12th, the 13th, the 1st, and then the 14th. That's right. That's how it's going to go. And so that's basically the red line is Perrin and a little bit of Ramseur and Thomas. And Iverson and Doles are going to be out there. Daniel and O'Neill, remember, were shifted over to Culp's Hill that night for the morning assault.
Right.
So they're going to be doing it out with primarily Orland Smith's brigade, 55th Ohio, 73rd Ohio, and 136th New York. All right.
Iverson's how much of Iverson's brigade was left by that point?
That's what I was about to ask, because they got control alt deleted.
maybe 500 guys. I mean, I'm estimating, but God. The battle, obviously, Pickett's charge is going to occur. None of those units in Long Lane are going to be deployed forward, which has always been a mystery to me. You've got five fairly strong, rested brigades that have not been, the shit hasn't been knocked out of them, and they're just not put forward. That's and so if anybody wants a great Gettysburg lecture, go to Troy Harmon. He's an NPS Ranger. He did Pickett's Charge, the Second Wave. It's a phenomenal lecture on the fact that Lee intended more supporting troops to go up and help, and none of these guys were thrown into the attack. So we know how the battle ends. Pickett's charge is repulsed. They're going to have a front row view. The guys in Perrin's brigade had the best seat in the house to watch Pickett's charge. And one of the guys in the lane is going to watch. He's going to say that everything was going great during the charge, but then they hit the road, the Emmitsburg Road, And he said they stopped and they wouldn't go past the road. He goes, and that was the problem from his point of view.
Well, to be fair, once they got to that road, things were a lot hairier.
But that, that was his perception, was had they gone beyond the road, they would have done better. But so the battle is over, and Perrin he's a very ambitious guy. He's going to be absolutely distraught that that Pender has been wounded and mortally wounded and died by this point, because Pender is his boy, and Pender saw what Perrin did that day. And Pender knows that Perrin's brigade did the fighting for his division, but Pender's been killed. And so Perrin's going to write a very interesting letter to Governor Millage Bonham after the battle, basically saying that, we marched in with a lot of confidence. Maybe we had too much confidence, but he's basically going to say that had Pender lived, we, meaning the brigade, we would for the first time have received justice. He assured me on the field that my services on that occasion should be made known and rewarded. What he meant by that, you may better judge than I. It's clear Perrin
wants a promotion.
Wants a promotion.
I'm not saying I should be a general, but I'm saying that Pender said I should be a general.
Right. But you can tell me, you tell me. So here's his letter, though, continued. He said, basically, he criticizes a lot of people. He says, we charged over Pettigrew's brigade. The poor fellows could scarcely raise a cheer for us as we passed. He goes, under the volley, Scales' brigade came to a dead halt. Scales' men gave away, and I never saw or heard of them until the next day. He said Lane's brigade never came up at all until the Yankees were out of reach. I mean, this is some pretty...
I have a question. So it's interesting that, Pettigrew's brigade gets basically halted in its tracks and they go to the ground and get passed over. Pettigrew, though, gets basically a brevet command to division commander to go along with Pickett's charge. So I'm just wondering why they kept all of Perrin's men in Long Lane instead of having Perrin now combine his forces into Pettigrew's and then take command of that division and go with Pickett and have it be the Pickett-Perrin charge.
Well, Perrin was just a colonel, so it would have been James Lane. James Lane took command of Pender's division.
Okay.
Because he was the senior brigadier.
But even then, having done so much better than Pettigrew's men, why wouldn't have Lane have taken command and have that whole force join in Pettigrew's brigade and make the assault force much bigger?
You should watch that.
They're different divisions. They're in different divisions.
Pettigrew, but that didn't really matter at the time. They were borrowing divisions from other corps.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well,
I think Ari Lee.
I think that's where to your point earlier, Ben, Pickett's charge was a much more complex battle plan than it wasn't supposed to just be Pickett's division and the Pettigrew's division. It was supposed to be much more in depth. Perrin
they did take two
Lane's
brigades.
Division should have been involved in that.
And they did take two brigades from Lane. They took two brigades from Pender/Lane division. They took Lane's brigade and they took Scales's brigade. Perrin and Thomas were not put into the assault. So keep that in mind as well, because they were in Long Lane. Had they been on Seminary Ridge instead of Long Lane, you would have had Perrin's brigade and Thomas's Georgians in Pickett's charge. I'm convinced of it.
Now, is this the same letter that Perrin blames Anderson for the fault of the entire campaign, correct?
Yep. And here's the quote here. So he basically says that Pender came up at one point, and I've got an account too of a young man who was wounded. He's brought back to Hare's Ridge during the assault, and he says, I could not believe that an entire Confederate division of infantry was stacked arms and resting, cooking rations on Hare's Ridge while we were duking it out and dying on the open plain below, and they never came to help us. And that was Anderson's division. You're Florida boys, Dylan.
Hey! Now it's not necessarily Anderson.
No, your Florida boys were sitting there as the South Carolinians were taking it on the chin. Okay. No.
Charge.
So now here's your boy Anderson. Here's what Perrin has to say about Dick Anderson. Okay. He goes, As soon as General Pender came up and when he told me to get my brigade together to rest, he said he had sent back for Anderson's division. Now remember, Pender and Anderson are colleagues. They're the same rank, right? Supposing, as I supposed, of course, that Anderson was not far off, but neither Anderson nor his division was anywhere to be found. The enemy during this eventful time was taking their new position at the Cemetery Hill, which afterwards baffled all of our efforts to take. The very batteries which we had run off, which we saw them take off through Gettysburg, were the first to fire a shot from their new position. The very infantry that we had run from the stone walls that surround Gettysburg were the first to form a line of battle in their new position. I suppose you will be curious to know where Anderson was and why he was out of the way at so important a juncture. His failure to be up was the cause of the failure of the campaign. It may have been General Hill's fault, and it may have been the fault of General Anderson himself. I saw nothing of him until the next day. And he's going to basically give Longstreet a kick as well, which I think is unfair, even though I don't like Longstreet. He said Longstreet, as usual, was out of the way and was not seen on the field until the next day. He does give Ewell some props. He goes, Ewell, as will always be the case with him, was in good time, but he had to attack the enemy in a strong position on his right and was held in check for a long time.
Okay, that's not fair. You're gonna give Ewell props, but you're not gonna. First of all, who is ordering Anderson to stay back?
We'll get to that. Hold on.
There we go.
I have one more note about Perrin. His last confirmed words are recorded for those who don't know, he was promoted to a full brigadier, but because McGowan returned to command the brigade, he was transferred to take over Wilcox's Alabama brigade. So he was a brigadier general by the end of 1863. And then going into the fight in Spotsylvania, I believe May 12th, the last words that were written down that he ever said also had to do with his goddamn promotions. And he said, I'm either going to make it through this day as a live major general or die a dead brigadier. And then he was killed in the fight at Spotsylvania.
He's going to take over Wilcox's Alabama brigade, coincidentally. And Wilcox is going to take over the light division for Pender. So we'll get to your questions. Hold on. So casualties, what we notice here are the two inside units in the brigade, the 12th and the 1st. Are going to have very similar casualties, 19 killed, 20 killed, 105 wounded, 94 wounded. And then the outer flank regiments, the 14th and the 13th, are going to have similar casualties, 35 killed for the 13th, 26 for the 14th. But look at the wounded for the 14th, where they're getting that hammered by that artillery. 220 wounded. Okay.
115 more guys.
Yeah. So that really tells you what they were facing on the left. So that's the presentation. You had asked what was the status of Anderson, Dylan, and I'll tell you, according to Anderson, Lee told Anderson that Anderson was his only reserve and he needed him in case disaster fell. I don't know that I agree with that because, of course, who did he have behind Anderson? All of Longstreet.
Right.
So I don't buy
Longstreet. You got to remember, Longstreet is still at Marsh Creek, almost 8 miles behind.
He's not even there yet. He's still back behind Cash.
He's still not even to Marsh Creek yet, and by the time he gets to Marsh Creek, he's still waiting.
Right.
But Anderson truly is at that point Lee's last division in reserve that he has to him on the field.
On the field, I agree. So, I do think though Anderson, if Anderson and Perrin and Lane had been brought up and moved against Cemetery Hill in conjunction with Ewell, I think you could have cracked that nut.
I just feel like Lee at this point is he's still not entirely sure that he wants to commit his entire force to an engagement here. And he's still in hopes that, okay, if one of these divisions can drive the enemy away and the attack stops for the day, it'll give me time to bring up the rest of my troops, and then we can launch a full army-sized assault. So he's still very hesitant at this point, not only because Anderson's his last division available on the field, but also because he doesn't necessarily want to commit an entire attack to this point.
Well, all right. I am going to respectfully disagree. The moment that Lee arrived on the field and ordered a general assault in the afternoon, this battle was not only his, but it became he was not hesitant anymore. He went all in. At the point he arrived on the field and ordered the full assault at 2 o'clock with Rhodes and Pettigrew and then Pender and Early. I think to say that he's hesitant at that point, I don't.
Okay.
I think this is his battle, and it's on.
So at this point, yeah, you're right. So at that point, once Rhodes has decided to commit his whole division, as well as Keith and Pettigrew are already in there. That point, yes, when he decides to commit his full force, that's a different story. But up until that point, how much of action are Perrin's men? How much action did Perrin's men see before that point?
None. They didn't go in until relatively.
So they get committed as a result of that decision. Okay.
Yes.
But even then, still, like, Lee is correct at that point, saying that he is his only division left in reserve. So how is Pender gonna, or how is Anderson gonna disobey Lee's orders and just go along with Pender? Or with,
Oh no, he shouldn't. He shouldn't disobey.
Exactly.
No, he shouldn't disobey. I think though that had they thrown in, I think they had about an hour. Okay, I think they had about an hour to get something moving against Cemetery Hill. And if you have a combination of Anderson, 5 fresh brigades, Lane's brigade, which is fresh, Thomas's brigade, which is fresh, throw Perrin and Scales out because they're tired. And then you've got Ewell on the other side of the town. I think between those two pincer movements, you crack that nut. I think you got about an hour to do it. If you don't do it, then it's not going to happen. But again, no, Anderson shouldn't disobey orders. If he had orders to halt, which he did, that's what he did. But I can tell you that it did not go down well with the South Carolinians, that his men were lagging and cooking rations on Hare's Ridge that evening.
So
Well,
even
considering
so let's say even Anderson does go and support Ewell, like you were just saying. At that point, it's up to Ewell to actually decide to attack Culp's Hill and make that.
Ewell asked Hill if he would support him, and Hill said no.
So ultimately, in my opinion, this failure of the campaign doesn't rest on Anderson; it rests on Hill.
No, I'm not saying it rests on Anderson. I'm saying that's what Perrin said.
No. I'm just disagreeing with Perrin here. I think if anyone is really to blame for the fault of this campaign, it's Hill in that moment.
In that moment, I think if Hill didn't support him or Lee, see, we don't know who held Anderson back. Right. We don't really know for sure. You have to think that it was Lee. I mean, Lee's on the field. This is Lee's fight from 2 o'clock on. This is Lee's fight. Before that, you can make a lot of assumptions. Heath bumbled into the fight. Rhodes screwed up at the very beginning with Iverson. Okay, but once Lee arrives, this is Lee's battle. So if Anderson's in the back in reserve, I think you got to look at the high command, Lee, Hill, and they obviously didn't want to commit him, which I think was a mistake. And if Ewell is asking for support, I think they should have given it to him.
Yeah, I don't see the sense in just saying no when outright you know that if you commit 5 more brigades, there's no way you're not going to win the field.
Possibly 7 more brigades.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't see how. It just speaks to the anxiety and the not knowing and the
fog of war,
lack of information on the enemy forces. It's really it plays big into it, because had they known the size of forces or whatever, they probably would have been less hesitant to offer Hill's assistance and 7 fresh brigades to Ewell.
Yeah,
it's a big part of it.
I think the fog of war. Lee was already a little bit. I guess we could use the word hesitant to not, because he didn't have Stewart, right? He doesn't know where Stewart is.
Not hesitant to commit his forces, but hesitant on how much he's going, how in depth this attack is going to go, not knowing the size of his enemy forces.
He probably looked at it and said, "Wow, we bumbled into this battle today, and yet we still whipped them." I mean, I've told people this. July 1st is one of the great tactical victories in the Army's history. And here they've done a magnificent job, and he probably is going to leave well enough alone. I don't know.
Yeah, if you look at July 1st, every force is being committed piecemeal, and they're still able to drive the entire federal force that's occupying the field completely off of the field to entirely new positions.
They
It is
destroyed 2 federal corps. They
and
destroyed
destroyed
the first.
two entire federal corps in the process. I mean, Meade is pulling his hair out at this point, freaking out, sending Hancock to the field to try and get a hold of things, and yeah, that attack just wasn't supported the rest of the 2 days. But yeah, that first day was such a tactical victory for the South, and it's so underrepresented. Like anytime anybody talks about Gettysburg, or you see an event, there's never any recreations of the first day's fighting. It's always, Pickett's Charge or the Wheat Field or Little Round Top or anything that Hollywood has made famous.
No, I think it's a very interesting day, and it really sets up how the rest of the battle goes.
Now, too,
But-
do you think? I mean, I think it can't be discounted that by and large the ANV was underestimating their opponent for pretty much all. What reason would anyone have to believe that all of a sudden the Army of the Potomac was going to come up with some great defensive resolve and not shy away from a fight this time?
Right.
I mean, you look at the last few, Chancellorsville, they rolled them up and eventually were able to take them out. Fredericksburg, they frontal assaulted through a town across a well-fortified position. Sharpsburg, it was a sharp fight, but then there was no pursuit or result. I mean, there was no demonstration against the Army of Northern Virginia after that. Second Manassas wasn't the AOP, but it was a disaster for the Federals. What reason does Lee necessarily have to believe that Meade is going to have this great stand along the ridges south of Gettysburg that had never been seen before from Union High Command?
He may have even thought that they might be gone the next morning.
Right. Cool. They retreated from Gettysburg. They're going to retreat all the way down to the Maryland border and set up, try to draw us in and defend Washington. I don't know.
I just want the record to reflect that the Florida troops allowed the South Carolinians to take it on the chin without help, without assistance. The North Carolinians left them out there alone. The Floridians, all of Anderson's division, you guys
Hold on.
just didn't want to fight.
Yeah.
The
214 troops of from the state of Florida are responsible for this.
Listen to me
saying.
right now.
Just saying, But
just because there was high command problems and hesitancy in deploying the rest of a fresh division does not lie solely on the shoulders of the 200 or 300 Florida troops.
Imagine for a moment, Lieutenant J.R. Boyles of Company C from the 12th South Carolina. He's got his leg half blown off. He's being taken to the rear on a gurney, okay, by a couple of Irishmen. And he goes up to Hare's Ridge and he sees Anderson's guys playing cards and cooking salt pork.
That's not the guy's fault.
I mean, his leg's blown off and the guys are having dinner.
Yeah, I'd be salty too if I had my leg blown off, and I'd be looking for anybody to blame. That's the thing.
He was absolutely destroyed mentally by that.
Let's say Anderson gets put in the Florida troops go in right alongside Perrin, and they replace Scales as they go in. And then how would you feel if the Florida troops then surpassed the South Carolinians and got into the town first, and were the first ones to put up a flag in the town, having exploited all the South Carolinians' success to their own advantage?
Well, I never thought of it that way, but that certainly would have changed history. I just J.R. Boyles' account, he goes, I couldn't believe, he goes, that there were all these guys on Hare's Ridge.
Here, if it makes you feel better, nobody got smacked in the chin harder at Gettysburg than the Florida troops. They had to charge against the same piece of ground.
I hit a nerve here. I really hit a nerve here. I don't.
There is no way.
Got a Dick Anderson defender here. My God.
I don't even like Anderson. I just care about Perry, who also criticized here. You know what? I will say one good thing to Anderson at the end of this. At the end of the Gettysburg campaign, Florida caught a lot of slack for supposedly failing to support, Pickett's charge, even though they're all the way at the end of the right, completely unsupported themselves. And Anderson actually writes to the Richmond Inquirer and to a Savannah Republican newspaper trying to clear the name of the Floridians after General Ambrose Wright had penned a horrifically false letter to his own wife that was then published, where he also blames the Florida troops with stuff that he knows isn't true. Wright goes along and says that Perry's brigade didn't even cross the Emmitsburg Road. They never came up at all. But really, Wright wasn't even on the field. He's in the hospital the whole time and didn't see any of Pickett's charge. And so Anderson gets a little bit of respect in my book for doing that. But I do agree that there should have been, more urgency put onto him to get into the fight on the first day.
Yeah, and I give Lee, and that's Lee's. I think that's Lee's fault. Obviously, if Lee had wanted the hill taken, Lee should have ordered the hill taken. I mean, now Ewell, however, should have interpreted Lee's order to say he really wants me to take this. I probably ought to give it a shot.
Yeah.
Now, so in that case, Ben, if Ewell interprets that as I need to take this hill, could Ewell have reasonably said, I can take it, but I need support? Who do you have?
That's what he said. That's what he said. I want support from Hill, and they wouldn't give it to him. So that's one of the reasons he didn't go forward. And they also, Ewell had to deal with those pesky Federals out on his left flank, out on the York Road. I think it was the York, maybe the Hanover Road. I don't remember, but there were signs and reports that there were Federals out on his left, and so he had to dispatch a couple of brigades out there to find out what was going on, and so that diluted his force even more. But I do have some theories on Anderson's attack on July 2nd that we should probably explore sometime for another episode. That whole division was lined up in a single line versus a double brigade line, as Longstreet's were. Right. And they were supposed to just tack on to Longstreet's victorious troops that were theoretically driving and crushing the Union flank in. They were just tacking on each brigade. And Longstreet's corps never made that, they never got them running that hard so that they could tack on. And so Anderson's deployment, I still question why they didn't deploy Mahone, why they didn't fully deploy Posey. The only three brigades that went in were Wright, Wilcox, and Perry.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Perry too at that point is also, they're just like we talked about at the very beginning, they're just conforming to the left of Wilcox. And they're going to do the same thing on the third day, but they are basically launching an unsupported attack at the center of the Union lines right there and just get hammered. You have the 1st Minnesota that crashes in on Wilcox, as well as the 11th Massachusetts that's going to crash in on Perry, and they're going to be forced back to the same starting point that they're going to start from the third day and cover the same track of ground in a futile attempt that they all know is futile because they just did it yesterday. And I just have some serious. So at that point, yes, I do blame Anderson a little bit for not committing Mahone and Posey, but then you have to look at Longstreet for ordering the whole attack to end prematurely, in my opinion.
Yeah, the premise of Anderson's attack on July 2nd was that the Federals would be running.
Right.
That the Longstreet had caved in the flank, and that, like I said, they were just going to tack on and continue this rolling assault up the flank. The Longstreet never got them running.
Because as we all know, en echelon attacks only work on paper.
I hate en echelon attacks. I think that's absolutely foolish. But it would have worked, Dylan. It would have. Anderson's division was always supposed to go in echelon, because again, the premise was that the Federals were already running, so each brigade would have tacked on as they were moving up. Longstreet's corps was never intended to be put in an echelon. They were supposed to be the huge, overwhelming flank assault, and then Anderson would just tack on to that incremental movement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the whole idea was that Longstreet was going to come up on the left flank of the entire Union line and then
envelop it and cave it in.
One massive force, and then instead Anderson is going to be committing troops piecemeal in echelon to support
Yes.
the attack. But as we all know, they ran right into the middle of Sickles Corps.
Because they never got the Federals running.
Exactly.
Okay.
There was no, yeah.
So that was the problem with the second, which we should probably do an episode on that someday. But
We just
Second day.
love talking about Gettysburg. We could sit here and do Gettysburg for like 5 episodes straight.
but I will say, let me say this about Perrin's attack and Pettigrew. It's classic Civil War tactics where you've got one division going up, Heath, fixing the Union line, developing the Union line. They fight out to it. They're fought out. They go to ground, and Pender comes in and sweeps through and carries the day. This is how Civil War attacks are supposed to go.
And very much similar to how Lee wanted the attack to go on the very next day. And it's just and everything collapsed. It's just crazy to me how fast things collapse for Lee's plan. And it's just one thing after the other that causes an entire division to fall off from the attack.
Don't think for a moment that Robert E. Lee didn't take a look at what happened on July 1st and say to himself, holy cow, my infantry is really good. Look what happened out here in the open field. Okay. You could make an argument that Perrin's attack was like a mini Pickett's charge.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking when we were talking about it. And that's pretty much what Lee intended for Pickett's charge. Hit the center and then drive both wings out and split the line. And then have a breakthrough that's supported by another division.
Yep.
And which is what happened on the first day. It happened perfectly on the first day. And Lee looked at that and went, wow, we didn't even intend for this. And here we are controlling the field.
Yep.
Let's do it again.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome presentation, man. I'm stoked. I wish I could have been there in person, but I'm so glad we got to do this today. And that was really, really cool. And like you were saying, hardly anybody even knows about Long Lane. I know people that live in Gettysburg that haven't even heard of Long Lane. So it's like, it's a very, very underrepresented part of the battle. That's just really
even
cool
the first day. I mean, I don't think everyone knows about Heath Division and the 26th North Carolina going up against 24th Michigan, Herbst Woods, and then it's like you black out and you wake up with Longstreet trying to attack Little Round Top. It's like there's a lot that happened in between there that set up for the next day.
Yeah,
and I think
the entire course of the battle is shaped in between those two moments right there.
Right. It's like, okay, so you go from there to there. What happened in between? Well, Perrin.
Everything.
Yep, it certainly was a good moment. These guys actually left Gettysburg with a really good taste in their mouth. They thought they had done well.
And this is just a small part that's covered in your book, right, Ben? I mean, your book is a full regimental history of the 12th.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's cool. Is it available for pre-order anywhere, or is it still?
No, not yet. It hasn't even been edited yet by the editors. Okay. I've edited about 12 times, but I'm getting kind of tired.
I was going to say, you keep editing.
I'm kind of tired, but it was an interesting, very interesting battle, and a good brigade, and a solid tactical plan, and a great execution by Perrin by himself, essentially with no help.
Yeah, going out and rallying his unsupported brigade and ordering specific sides to go in specific directions. Like, really, that shows how to take a handle on a battle as a commander and getting what needs to be done.
And good regimental and company commanders to make it happen.
Yes, exactly. Being able to recognize exactly what your brigade commander is asking for in the heat of a battle and the chaos of all of it. And while you're taking enfilading fire from artillery and from cavalry dismount, I mean, it is an absolute mess that they're in, and that they're able to just get a hold on and really take control of the situation. It's really impressive.
Very Lee-esque move to just say, I don't know what's going on, but we're going forward. Follow me.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
One of the few brigadiers to do, or I guess he was a colonel at the time. As self-serving as he was, he had some balls to him.
Yeah, that's the culture of the Army of Northern Virginia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very impressive. Very underrepresented. That would be a cool impression to do. Perrin's Brigade at Gettysburg. and
We
just do
tried.
the whole recreation of the first day.
We
At
tried.
Liberty Rifles,
We
where are you
tried.
guys at?
We
Get it
tried.
set up. We got records of what they were wearing. We got commissary. We got everything that the Liberty Rifles would want. Let's get that event going.
So yeah, I mean, so there are three. I have three bucket list marches on my list. Well, for the Eastern Theater, but one is from Harper's Ferry to Sharpsburg, the 17 miles in like 8 hours
Yeah,
or
the
whatever they
AP Hill
did.
March.
And then the other is Cashtown to Gettysburg following Perrin's, and then the other is Federal from Wilderness to Spotsylvania, when they all like started cheering and stuff because Grant was actually moving southward and not retreating.
Let's
Those
do let's do some of Gordon's men, Appomattox to Georgia. Oh my
Oh
god.
gosh.
What a miserable walk that would be.
After losing,
Yeah,
defeated,
exactly.
the walk of shame.
4 years after, you watched all your friends die, you've starved, you've froze, and then the only thing that you've had with you the entire time, your rifle. Here's my best friend. And they're like, cool, go home. Can I get a ride? No.
When we did
Yeah, we'll pay for your train tickets. Cool. Can I hop on the railroad that runs from Virginia to Georgia? No, that doesn't exist anymore.
No, we destroyed that.
Gone.
Ben, you remember when we did the 150th Appomattox? We actually did it on the national park.
In front of the McLean House. Yep.
We did the march up the Richmond Lynchburg Stage Road, and we did it. It was actually on C-SPAN. It was pretty cool. And
that's really cool.
When we stacked arms, we all knew in our minds that we had to give up our rifles, right?
Right. And then it was sling boxes and
when we had to, I'll tell you what, seriously, when I had to give I was a battalion commander, when we had to give the command to sling boxes, it was like the guys were taking off a part of their body and putting it on the stack. And that's honestly, there were tears in the guys' eyes because they just hadn't mentally reconciled the fact that they had to give up their traps. And again, this is a recreation, right? I mean, imagine how the real guys felt. Like, you've worn this cartridge box, and we know we got to give up our rifle, but giving up your part of your trappings,
something that you've worn on your person every single day and has gone
right
for every single campaign.
That was a completely different feeling, and that's when the guys really started to get emotional. But anyway, we should probably put a bow on this one, guys.
Yeah, we're an hour 40 into this, so go ahead and sign off here. Thanks everyone for listening again. Once again, Ben's book should be out sometime in the next calendar year. It'll be called The Invincible 12th. Hope to see you there. Message us with any recommendations. If you want to send us Yingling, this is a cry for help. We don't get the benefits of distribution here.
A little bit of low.
And Perrin's Brigade, while kind of often overlooked, played a much more significant part in the Battle of Gettysburg than you might have realized. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We will see you in the next episode, which I don't know what that's going to be yet, but it'll be out there. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.
Fantastic rest of your day.
Good seeing you, boys.